Welcome to episode 17 of The Aspiring STEM Geek. In this episode, I talk to Anthony Palmiotto of OpenStax. Within the episode, we talk about open educational resources. Open educational resources includes things such as open source textbooks, which are free to students and teachers. In the episode, we talk about how OpenStax develops these open educational resources, how different colleges and universities utilize these resources, how contributors help create these open source textbooks, and open educational resources versus proprietary textbook publishers. I want to thank OpenStax for helping develop these resources. It is really impactful to provide these resources for free to students, teachers, and schools that are struggling financially. I also want to thank everybody that's helped contribute to open source and open educational resources. If you are a student or teacher, please share this with your administration, and hopefully we can get more free educational resources to more people. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Anthony Palmiotto, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. So glad to be here.
And you are the director of higher education at OpenStax, and that's going to be the main focus is open educational resources. And this is a topic I'm very excited about, and I'm also passionate about as well.
Well, wonderful. Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. And I appreciate the welcome and the impact this can have, and your passion for open educational resources, because they can be very impactful for students, learners, and educators all over.
Yeah, I'll be excited to share this with other teachers just across K through 12, as well as the university level. So OpenStax is the organization you work for, and that's going to be a big focus of this podcast. But before we get into OpenStax itself, could you explain what open educational resources are? And often we'll refer to it as OER, just so to shorten things. And what makes an open textbook different from a proprietary textbook, such as McGraw-Hill or Pearson?
Absolutely. So OER in general are resources that could be used in educational spaces and educational contexts that are published and released, usually in digital formats, almost always, under a license that permits reuse, redistribution, some levels of modification. So that's just OER in general. And OER, you mentioned textbooks. Textbooks are often what people think of when they think of OER, but other things could be OER. Articles, monographs, other educational resources can be used, but not everything that is accessible that you can get. You can get to a YouTube video doesn't necessarily make it OER, depending on how it's licensed. So there's a couple of nuances there, but we create and OER textbooks are typically textbooks that they look and feel like textbooks in some ways. OpenStax is we do it a specific way that I'll share. But in general, OER textbooks are textbooks that are created for the general purpose that a typical textbook is created, to serve as a course resource, either the core resource or an ancillary resource, or in a course setting, in a learning setting. But they are not. They are released openly, so students can access them without having to pay, and through various means. They might be able to find them on an OER repository that people host OER assets. Often they're accessible through something with the campus or the institution's library, or through organizations like OpenStax and other OER providers that offer OER textbooks.
Man, I wish I had this in community college, especially. But yeah, even going to a 4-year university to finish my 4-year undergraduate, I can tell you that textbook prices were always an issue. And now, since I've left university, at least on the undergraduate level, now you have this rollout of subscription textbooks, and it it costs a lot, especially I work at a community college, so I know how difficult it can be paying for proprietary books out of pocket.
Right. It's exactly. And that is really the key differentiator. Even when, with subscription services, and there are textbook purchasing models that have reduced prices that are, maybe there's a monthly fee instead of an all-in fee. And I have to say, I'm an OER advocate, but those purchasing models provided by commercial publishers can be helpful to students. It may be easier for many students to pay $10 a month rather than $150 all at once or something like that. On the other hand, but they are proprietary, and the publisher owns all aspect of that and can really lock down and control not only what the student does, but what the instructor or the institution does, because there's limitations on how you can combine and recombine materials and so on. And that has its place. If there are limitations those publishers want to put on, that's fine. We support all types of rights, academic rights, commercial rights, and so on. OER is a little different because it allows that flexibility of recombining different resources, which can be helpful not only for the access part, but there's so much going on of intertwining different disciplines and students. Taking one course might need to have information for another. Being able to get that information, whether it's prerequisite, co-requisite, enrichment, all in one learning environment, all in one learning management system, or all in one textbook, that can be really powerful and make it a better learning and more seamless learning experience for students.
Yeah, I definitely want to compare and contrast the proprietary against the open source, and we're definitely going to get into it. But as far as OpenStax as an organization, what are your main goals?
So our mission, our stated mission, is to provide access to an amazing education for all. And every word there means a lot to us. Access means that people can get it. Amazing. Now, amazing can be defined in different ways. And I'm not going to say that every student who's taking, first year, whatever course it is, that might be a gener ed requirement or something, that, are they thrilled to be in that class, and can it be thrilling? No, not necessarily. But, the way I take it is, when a student wants to use or needs to use a course material, whatever it is, that they have a positive learning experience that could be meaningful and memorable to them. And that takes work. And so what Open Education Resources does, what OpenStax tries to do, is to make those experiences available to everyone. And when we say everyone, the all part of our mission is we try to make it accessible and available to people using it in every country, every state, every type of school, and folks with different learning abilities, disabilities, neurodivergent folks from different backgrounds, and also in different learning contexts. We know that not even at colleges, not every course is the same. Some are async, some are accelerated, some are taken in a different part of the country or on a military base somewhere overseas and so on, or in an incarceration facility or whatever it is. We want to make sure we're serving all of those users. And so that's really our approach, our mission. We're a nonprofit. We're part of Rice University, which is a nonprofit organization. And we're really just trying to be anchored in affordability, like we've said, but also convenience, and really build up a community and focus on, we also, as being part of a research university, we have a research arm that focuses on improving learning experiences and doing research on those as well.
Yeah, in terms of catering it to the students, I definitely want to talk about what your organization calls remixing, is taking the OER textbooks or some other just resource and catering it to the students. Because I haven't been teaching for too long, but I've definitely learned that customization is very, very important. And even within a classroom, different groups of students within the classrooms just digest information differently.
Absolutely. I think one of the harder things for many faculty that they share with us is, the audience changes all the time. It's sometimes because of generational changes, and students just evolve. And every couple of years, you have a new sort of group of students, but also a new major at a college, a new focus at a college can all of a sudden insert a whole bunch of new students into a course where that population was not there before. Nursing majors may come into a course where nursing majors were never before, and so on. And they might learn differently, not really by major, but by motivation or focus or the prerequisites they had. And it could be really, really difficult for faculty to manage different levels of interest, preparation, learning style within a course. But the customization ability can make that as positive as possible. And then continuing to improve all the time. You customize once, that doesn't have to be the end. You can tweak it again later on.
Yeah. And kind of to get to the majors, I limited experience so far, but a lot of the students that I teach are nurses. So one of the ways that I customize the statistics course, it is a requirement. I have no illusions. Nobody's super excited to take stats for the most part. I can't fault them for that. So it's bringing in relevant material, like let's make this an example within a hospital, and I'll try to do a little bit of research to make sure that it's an actual legitimate real world problem that they may see and how to apply statistics towards it. So I guess even within majors, I've kind of, although I've mostly seen nursing students, I think I would teach computer science students or pure math students a bit differently.
I agree, and that is something where the students know, we want the students to feel seen, to feel like somebody's doing something for them, and right, and they might recognize that, hey, it's mostly nurses in this class, but then there are other students too, but having some of it be for them, and that work you're putting in, it sounds like very diligently doing that. And some of the OER allows you could find maybe in one of an OER nursing book, there is a problem, a stats oriented problem in a dosage calculation or some sort of population health chapter that maybe uses statistics, and you can maybe it doesn't perfectly fit into your class, but you can modify that. That's something that we're trying to provide. I think that's some of the benefit of having a really large movement in OER, but also better search. This is where AI might be able to help this sort of thing, cataloging and finding some of these things that can be brought in different places and so on.
Yeah. And to go for the textbooks themselves, I know that this is a question that OpenStax often gets. What's the actual process in developing textbooks? At this point, your organization has created a variety of textbooks from biology to mathematics to even nursing. So curious what that process is like.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. It's really extensive. We basically put in a very similar publishing process to what a commercial publisher would do. And it involves people from that background. I personally have a background in commercial publishing before I joined OpenStax, and most of our editors, production editors, and so on, and have the same. But it's really centered in doing it's usually could be 18 months, 2 year, or even longer process. And a large chunk of that process is on the initial part is on research, researching what faculty need, what courses require, the differences between different courses at different types of institutions. And we try to, in that research, do a broad base of, sampling, if you will, at all types of institutions, all types of geographies, different states, different levels, different sizes of school. And it's really very faculty centered there. We're looking at syllabi, we're running focus groups, we're doing surveys. And then from that emerges a group of faculty that want to take part. And it is always faculty who teach that course and have expertise in that field. And then they start the writing process. And then from here on out, it's all writing, review, revision, writing, review, revision. We will do that, rinse and repeat as many times as needed, from outline to first draft to second draft to fifth draft if needed. We have a lot of practices that, in some cases where having the same reviewer stay consistent through a book, but also bringing in new reviewers every stage to get both a kind of cohesive perspective, but also new perspective. We go through those processes to get the textbook written. And then the publishing process is done with a great deal of care to make sure that, it's fully accessible, that the material can be used on all different platforms, screen readers, mobile, obviously, laptops, computers, and other types of readers, and that it's distributable in a lot of different formats. We provide the material in an online ebook, but also downloadable PDFs and other versions. But then people can take that and use it in other ways because of the way we produce it. So it takes it's a really thorough process. There's a lot of steps and a lot of people involved, but the primary people that are involved are faculty teaching those courses. And then, the other thing is once it's published, we don't stop. We keep improving, we take feedback and so on, and we'll keep going on the book as well, still involving faculty, but even broadening it because now it's the community that's adopted it, giving feedback and helping us as well.
That's awesome. And to talk about the remixing, so this is you have a textbook, and then a instructor or potentially even a student can take that and reformat it or maybe change some of the problems. Are I guess, how have you seen instructors use it, and do you have any limitations on remixing?
Well, I would say we've seen people make entirely new courses, such as, we don't have most of our textbooks are fitting, introductory courses that are U.S. history course, a calculus course, an intro bio course, like you were mentioning before. But what if there is an energy course on campus, just a energy 101, or somebody wants to take their chemistry course and turn it into cooking chemistry or forensic chemistry or something? We've seen all sorts of things like that. And then going in the other direction, a lot of our textbooks, as with many sort of commercial textbooks, they're geared toward the structure that sort of serves a full semester or 2-semester sequence, depending on the book and the course. But colleges teach 4-week sequences. They might run certain types of classes that only meet once a week, but for the whole year. They might do some things on other sites and so on. So we've seen customizations fitting all those different needs, whether it's adding, bringing in other content, deeply, reducing, and then also even things like, the one of the great stories that we've always loved to tell is that, there's different ways to teach certain courses, different approaches entirely. And at University of Connecticut, they taught intro chemistry, which at a school like that is taken by thousands of students. They teach it in a different sequence. It's a sequence that a lot of other schools use. It's just not the majority sequence. So our book was written in the general chemistry format that everybody does, but we couldn't naturally serve this group that teaches it this other way. So it was actually the library collaborating with the student government, and the student government funded their own professors to revise our book to make it fit that method. And the student government's rationale was, in part, I'm being a little flippant here, but we can host another event on the quad, or we can save 2,000 students $150, $200, $300 on their textbook. And they did the latter. But the great part about OER, they didn't have to do this, but they released it back to OpenStax so that we can publish it. So now we have 2 chemistry books, one that fits the majority approach and one that fits this sizable minority approach, called Atoms First. And we've seen that happen with our business statistics book, with other courses entirely, like thematic courses and so on. And then going to other countries. We have an economics book or a statistics book, and the examples are very US based. Just, we're US based, we're mostly serving a US audience. But group in Canada, BC campus, British Columbia campus, created statistics, economics that are serving a Canadian audience, where a lot of the core concepts are the same, but the examples are, of course, all Canadian. So we've seen those types of things, and that's just enabled faculty to provide that access for their students without having to start from scratch. And those, we really like those. And you asked about limitations. There really aren't. So most of our books are all of our books are licensed under Creative Commons license. Some have a commercial restriction, so they're Creative Commons non-commercial, so only non-commercial entities can use them. But that means that almost every educational institution can use them as in the ways I've already described. I think sometimes the limitation comes down to how you're actually customizing, in what environment, in what way. Sometimes how are they going to republish it? That's something that comes up. But there are solutions for that on campuses. Some of our technical partners have solutions for doing customization in their platforms, or at an institution, there might be a platform that they use for publishing, or maybe something through the learning management system that allows them to do so.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was going to follow up and see if any of those Remix textbooks have ever made their way back to OpenStax, but that's great to hear about the chemistry book. So
it's used by hundreds of thousands of students over the years. It's really been impactful. So it's a great story.
Yeah, that's awesome. For the non-commercial ones, this is part of my ignorance of K through 12. I don't really know how it works. What does that mean that private schools and charter schools can also use those? Or okay, yeah,
they can. So the way that it works is this is a little there's I don't want to say there's a debate, but there's interpretation. But essentially, the non-commercial license prevents most commercial entities from using it sort of off the shelf. But we make it really clear that for educational institutions, even a private school or even a for-profit college or something, the intention is for use. And then if another entity came and said, hey, I wanted to provide this for a private school or any schools, a commercial entity comes, we actually have a program for that called our Technical Partners Program, where for-profit entities can use all of our books. But there's just some different approaches that we take there. And then, especially around attribution. One of the important things is that all of those ways require a certain type of attribution back to OpenStax, and sometimes, depending on how the attribution is given, to the authors and the other source material. And so we work with organizations to make sure that that's handled properly, and also because they want to, because that's also providing good informational literacy training and academic integrity training, sort of guidelines for their students themselves. They're seeing everything cited properly and acknowledged the right way.
Yeah, that is amazing. So, given that you focus on the higher education, so colleges, universities, when it comes to the adoption of your books, have you found that certain educational cohorts tend to incorporate the OER in general, just the resources, more than others? For example, is there a higher rate amongst community colleges or state colleges versus private schools? And then are there any Ivy League universities that you know of that utilize your textbooks or resources in general?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, we really seek to serve a broad base and do serve a broad base of users. We have about 7 million users per year in the United States and Canada. And that's based on, confirmed reporting by the faculty member or the institution itself. And that represents all types of institutions. To your specific question, so community colleges and public institutions have been probably our strongest adopters, but that definitely crosses 2 and 4 year universities. We're actually pretty evenly split between 2 and 4 year universities, community colleges and 2-year schools like that, and 4-year schools. We're pretty evenly split. And actually where it happens with the numbers, sometimes community colleges, there are more in number, but they're not as large as, some of the large universities. So it ends up being about even there. And in terms of, it's very important that we serve all types of schools, like you mentioned. So it's community colleges, tribal colleges, minority serving institutions, 4-year R1 research universities, and yes, highly selective schools like Ivy League schools. We work and have had, collaborations with some of them. And then in terms of straight adoption, Harvard uses some of our books, Stanford has used some of our books, Carnegie Mellon, several others of those types of University of Chicago, several others of those types have used our materials. And the important thing is, this is, faculty member, when we say school, and, in case your audience isn't aware of the adoption process. So when we say schools use them, the way that people adopt a textbook most typically is that a faculty member or a department or committee within that department decides, which book to use for a specific course. And so that means that a faculty member or a department decided that our book was used. It's not that, the president of a school or a provost says, hey, we're using these books with this publisher. And that goes for us and commercial publishers. Where we do benefit, of course, is that OER is something that allows all this freedom and access. So we do have so much support at the institutional level, all the way up through institutional leadership and administration. But the individual determinations are typically made by faculty, and that goes for all those schools I just mentioned, from the elite selective universities and all the other types that I mentioned as well.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just an adjunct, so I can tell you I'm starting to review the Intro to Statistics book that OpenStax provides, and I'm hoping we can adopt it. I just have to go through the department and all that. But yeah, I'm definitely hoping to push that through.
Yep. It's really great when you have advocacy like that. We have a lot of adoptions at the service academies as well. And the interesting thing
this would be like West Point or the Naval Academy. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And the interesting thing there is, they're very selective schools. In most cases, textbook purchasing there is not, it's not the same. There's some sort of stipend or something like that that's given to students. So students aren't paying outright. So it's not always about price. It's about the quality and the remixing they can do. Some of the most amazing customizations we've seen have come out of those schools and additions to those, because they're teaching in a specific way. But what's interesting is, the faculty there often rotate out very often. Some are a stay, but some, if they're in the military, they would rotate to another assignment. And then it's sort of reinvigorating it, reconnecting with them to see like, okay, well, this is what your last cohort did. There's a new cohort now, and how you want to improve it this time. So it's sort of a microcosm of what happens, at different schools, especially as, adjuncts come and go or move into different positions, and courses change over time. It's a really powerful, once we see those adoptions happening, customizations happening, and so on, it becomes powerful and informative for us to improve our resources.
Yeah, that's really interesting, specifically about the service academies. I had an internship at one point at West Point where I was doing a little bit of cryptography, and the faculty there, like you were saying, you have some that are in the military and then outside of the military, but I definitely know that the military process rotates people frequently. So it's really interesting to think about that, and having a fresh pair of eyes to kind of critically look at things. And I know people within the military they're trained to look at things very critically right off the bat. Yeah. Okay. So OpenStax is part of Rice University, as you were saying, and that's in Houston, Texas, which is in the southern United States. So our most spoken language is English, and then followed by Spanish. Makes sense that OpenStax provides textbooks in those languages. I'm curious how Polish also got into the mix, if you can expand on that.
That's a great question. So OpenStax, we have most of our translations are either in Spanish or Polish, and we work closely with a division of a company in Poland. That really comes through in ways the Rice Connection. One of our core advisors and supporters, Brian Patterson, works with an organization in Poland, and they undertake these very detailed, high quality translations of our books. And it's not just translation, it's actually the adaptation, because they'll do those customizations around content and context that I was sort of mentioning about Canada before. They'll go to make sure that, some of the chapters go right over, but in some cases they're changing context or changing examples. It doesn't make sense to have a bunch of mentions of Seattle or Minneapolis or something in a Polish textbook. They'll change those, and of course more important things than that.
I use Seattle as my rain example when I'm doing like, there's X amount of rain in Seattle. So
right,
I have not been yet, but it's on my to-do list. I know
it's right there. Yeah, bring an umbrella. So that is how that emerged, and they OpenStax Polska puts out several translations of our books a year. And of course, that process was started, some years ago. So now there's maybe other ways to do translations, and glad to chat about those. But the way that they were doing them is this very diligent, very publisher, centered approach, the way that I was actually mentioning OpenStax's process is.
Yeah, it's great. And kind of for Are you thinking about using AI in terms of translating some of it? I know that personally, I know that there's a lot of issues, but I upload to YouTube a lot outside of this podcast, and it translates a lot of my short form videos to different languages, such as I'm trying to think of Spanish is definitely one of them. I think also Portuguese and a few others. And I've heard from people that speak those languages natively that it's actually doing a pretty decent job. But I'd assume you still want the scrutiny of a person also going through something like that. So what are the discussions around that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have been doing these translations. We did another set of translations in Spanish that was sort of half automated and half human. One of the things we did to preliminarily was, what are the words in this discipline that are most likely to cause some problems, where the translation might mistranslate something that has a different context. And that was as important in chemistry and physics as it was in, humanities type course, because just different ways of phrasing and orders of words can mean, very different things. So that's a consideration. And that's just an example of something that you have to think about when doing this work. But we're very open to using AI in these ways. Because if we can sort of control it, make sure we're being responsible, make sure that we're being diligent, and that the assets going into it are ones that we can really trace, that it's only training or translating based on our material and not bringing in third-party material, not because we're against third-party material, but because we want to make sure we're attributing it properly and we know that we're being responsible in that way. We're not infringing on anybody else's copyright or anything. And I think the other part of it is that this isn't just us. So, some of the OpenStax tech, we work closely with other organizations in the OER space, at the academic space, and also in the, large and small technical space. So a number of OpenStax books have been ingested into the Google Notebook LM series or platform. And that has auto translation. Almost, it's probably the same backend that you're using on YouTube, essentially, it's almost click to translate, and so that's something that people can do sometimes in real time. Now, does that offer the same sort of quality as having it done and then having a professor who's bilingual or speaks that language go through it? No. Could it work on the fly? Could it work as a supportive mechanism? Yes. So we're really willing to explore that further, and we'd love to. This is where partnership, I think, really comes into play.
Yeah, definitely. So as far as your contributors, when you're looking to build out a textbook, say that you've heard from schools that we could talk about manufacturing. I know that's one of your textbooks. Lots of schools are asking for it. Do you proactively go out and look into those professors, or do you? I assume it's a mix of that, and then you also have a lot of people that volunteer to do it. I'm curious how that usually comes about for a specific textbook.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mentioned earlier in our process, the first part is that research. And in that research, we're researching what should be in the books, not only for now, but what's changing in this course that needs to be there 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, when the book actually comes out, and then also identifying people. And so where the people that emerge sometimes emerge as our authors come through that research process. They're the most responsive. They're the ones that have ideas. But we also take a very active approach to recruiting specific people with specific, from specific academic backgrounds, subdivisions within a discipline. Who's expert in this, who's expert in that part, and and it's a very collegial process. Often, the first authors that come to the process, or the first academics that we're working with, will actually say, "You might need somebody to do this, or you might need somebody for that," or "I know a group this, and they'll help us." But the other part of the active recruiting is so that we really get a deep representation. Because maybe people from a certain background or state in their career, recently retired or something like that, may have more time to write textbooks, which is outstanding. On the other hand, we want to make sure we're representing people from all stages in their career, from all different backgrounds, races, ethnicities, types of schools, and geographies. And so that active recruitment is important. And then, and so where looking at academic websites. We're looking who's written on a topic. We're going who's speaking at conferences about different educational topics within that discipline. So who's speaking at the economics conference about improving economics education, who's speaking about even you see these educational articles. It's a micro, how do we teach the central, limit theory in a new way, to a student from a different background, to a nurse or something like that. Like those, you'll see papers and talks just on that. And, do we need somebody who's just focused on that specific thing to write that section? No, but somebody who's thinking about it that way, that could be a great contributor. So we really balance that sort of active and passive approach. Fortunately for OpenStax, with all the support that we've gotten and all the usage that we have, sometimes people are, as he's coming to us and saying, I have an idea. I started on this textbook. Do you want to help me with it? Do you want to hook me, up with other faculty who might be interested? That happens a lot as well. We're really fortunate for that too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And definitely the diversity of experiences, that is something that's important, because somebody may have experienced something that someone else in the field has, and they can contribute to a certain chapter. And also, just in general, I have a large fondness for people that take the time to contribute. And kind of as I've gotten more in the tech field, open source is very big in computer science and technology, and there are people that are supporting these tools that we use every day, and they're just giving their time and their knowledge, which is very, very valuable. And it's the same case here, where these university professors, some of them are very acclaimed and they can write a textbook and sell it to Proprietary and make money. But to actually contribute to it, I just have a large appreciation for that, just as a little tangent going there.
No, I think you're right on. It's amazing because they have so much to do. And I think it's for every type of instructor from every type of institution, because, somebody at a research university might be balancing teaching with research and, helping their grad students and their postdocs and, but also writing a textbook. And then somebody who's adjuncting at a community college, has many different courses, getting assignments late, helping students in a different way through different, sometimes not just helping with that homework, it's with life, and those sorts of things and other sort of service that you do. And then to contribute. And folks, we see, just like you're saying in the open source and the software, people combing through the textbooks and providing suggestions, people creating YouTube channels, hundreds of YouTube channels based on the OpenStax textbooks. And sometimes, maybe they're doing it for their students, as a specific resource, but they're putting it out there for everyone. And it takes, you're the person who knows this far more than me, but hours and hours and hours to set up the video, get in the space, get the slides together, get any graphics that you're going to use so they can do these presentations. And they're amazing. And they're just going out to everybody at no charge. It's just there for people to use and for other teachers to use, So I think it's important that we really acknowledge that and focus on those amazing contributions that teachers are making.
Yeah. Thanks again to everybody that's contributed to open source. So you talked about the OER landscape. So there's obviously more than just your organization or OpenStax that contributes to this field. When it comes to others in the field, is there ever collaboration between OpenStax and different organizations? Such as, I know that there's the Open Textbook Library, which is sponsored by the University of Minnesota.
Yes, we've had collaborations of different types over the years. Sometimes they're very intensive and focused on a specific project, and sometimes it's sort of something that evolves. There could be kind of come together and then move forward. But there are, our interest in having to make sure that the Open Textbook Library, which hosts OpenStax books, but hundreds of other resources from other places, we want to make sure that that's really used. And one of the ways we contribute, even if they're not even aware of it, is, every time we're presenting to a faculty group, you are asked, about, okay, which is your biology book? Do you have a book for this course? We don't, but we can go in the Open Textbook Library and find it. Or we can go in another place. There's something called OER Commons. That's produced by an organization called ISKME, which is based in California. And that's a larger repository of all types of resources, everything from a textbook, and even bigger than textbooks, whole sets, to an individual learning object, like a lesson plan. or interactive or something. And again, more people contributing and an organization like that. And so we work with those organizations on everything from promoting the resource to working on some back-end things. How should we alter the metadata and events, in relation to this? How is search going? And then individual states, individual colleges can be really powerful because there are OER initiatives at colleges. Some of the largest and most well-known are things like Affordable Learning Georgia, OER Texas, CUNY Academic Commons, Skills Commons, and so on, but Wisconsin Tech, WisTech. But sometimes, the greatest thing is that it could be a smaller college and not a lot of people outside the organization, that college or that college system know about it. But what can we as OpenStax and the rest of the OER community do to promote that to everybody else? That's a lot of networking, a lot of listservs, and a lot of forums where people are sharing and promoting, cross-promoting, hosting conferences and events. So all those collaborations take place sometimes in the very technical front, and sometimes on the content front, and sometimes on the funding front, and then sometimes on the sort of public knowledge and marketing distribution front.
Yeah, that makes sense given all those fronts that you mentioned. It does seem relatively complex to put this all together, and funding, I assume a lot of the organizations here are nonprofits, so that's tricky in itself. So the first open educational resource that I really had contact with was Khan Academy back when I was in community college and going through my calculus courses and struggling hard with them. So does your group ever recommend a resource like Khan Academy or others when you're talking to, I assume, schools or instructors in general?
We do, yeah. So so Khan Academy is, it's like you're saying, it's very well known, and some folks come to it either through their academic studies or maybe with their own, as they're helping their children study or something like that, or comes through their schools, their K-12 schools. We recommend them. In some of our books, we're linking to Khan Academy videos, and then in retrospect, Khan Academy is using some of our content as some of its base or background material. That's something that we really, respect what they do. And we really see this complementary and not competitive. That's how a lot of these organizations per se, the way I think about it is that, any individual faculty member like yourself, you might not be able to use every OER entity out there, but probably on every campus, there's probably a place for every OER entity out there. It's just about getting that information across and making that available. And Khan is obviously great at getting, their message out, providing a wealth of different type of materials, tools, resources, advancing the field. And we try to get in there as well. And then, but it is important, like there are, like you said, there's so many other orgs, large and small, individual faculty members building tools, folks in specific disciplines that, hey, this is a problem, this is not being solved, in our discipline, graphing in econ, or accessible chemical modeling in chemistry and other and related disciplines and so on. So for every Khan and OpenStax, there's a 2 or 3 person team or an individual also doing it, trying it, advancing things. And sometimes those folks will show up on lists of, the best, hottest new ed techs. And sometimes they won't, but it's like our job as a community to sort of, make them well known as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, personally, for supplementary resources, whenever students write, or I give them supplementary resources right away, it's Khan Academy. I've also linked the Intro to Stats book if they want an additional textbook alongside of what we're working with already.
That's great. Yeah, I mean that's a great starting, thing, because even if you can't make that choice to switch over to OER fully, having that available for your students as an option, and sometimes also, probably one of the reasons you do it, just a different look, a different viewpoint. We might get into this, but no matter how many reviewers or folks are involved with the textbook, it's going to take a certain way of it explaining a certain topic or theory or use a certain example. So maybe just an alternate perspective, an alternate description there is helpful for those students to learn it And it might be provides the professor with a couple of other examples to bring or another way to look at something as well. So yeah, having that recommendation is it can be really powerful for students and give them options in terms of not only how they're getting the materials, but how they're actually learning.
Yeah. Learning to me is it obviously varies from person to person, and it can vary widely. But at the end of the day, the more you do it, the better the outcome usually turns out to be. And having a graph from the OpenStax textbook to have more visual, just visual look at it, or maybe they represent the data differently, I just personally think it's very valuable. Okay, so there have been very highly regarded academic researchers that have contributed to your books. The famed mathematician Gilbert Strang, who also was a contributor to the Calculus Volume 3 textbook. I also know that he does MIT courseware because I was looking at his courses when I was going through college. Timothy Simpson from Penn State was a senior contributor to the additive manufacturing book. The astronomer Andrew Fracknoy, and he was a senior contributor to the astronomy book that you have. How did you get such esteemed academics to volunteer their time to do this?
Well, I should say that it's not all volunteer. We do actually compensate faculty in some cases, but it will never equate to the amount of work they'll put in. So I just want to make that clear. It's sometimes we are compensating, but even so, they're putting in so much time. It's really, I think, attraction, their commitment to educational mission. I think, they have many of those faculty that you mentioned have the option or have even published with commercial publishers and have other ways to go, but they see this opportunity to provide a resource. And some of them, they might have a different type of textbook, such as an upper level textbook that they do publish with a commercial publisher, but they feel that the intro textbook, that everybody's taking to get students into the discipline, is something they want to make available that way. And I often think of, you mentioned Andy Fracknoy on the astronomy note, and Andrew Fracknoy and his co-authors. Sydney Wolf was the director of the Vera Rubin Observatory project for the first 10 years of it, just releasing its first images. She was the manager of Kitts Peak. And David Morrison, his other co-author, managed the Ames Laboratory. So these are, just like you're saying, absolute powerhouses, but at their core, think of what do so many astronomers want to do is to make sure that, science itself, not even just astronomy, is available and ready for students. And that's what, I think a lot of these researchers, they could research in a lab somewhere, for a company instead of an academic. Many of them are finding themselves on college campuses because teaching and that process of learning and making, bringing up the next generation of learners in every discipline are really powerful. So we really are so amazed that this caliber of faculty want to take part. And they really come from all different places that are contributing either in the research that backs the entire discipline or deeply advancing teaching. Their contributions are more on the educational front, and how are you teaching a certain subject to urban youth? How are you handling that? How are rural? Those challenges. How are you handling educating refugees or incarcerated people or so on? A lot of our authors are focused on those things, and if you can bring that into a textbook, it's just making it more accessible for everyone and really accomplishing almost all of the educational missions. There's no college out there that says, hey, we just want to serve this audience. They even selective ones have a broader mission. So I think that it's really just part and parcel of their overall, view on the world and how they want to contribute to it.
Okay. Yeah, it's awesome. And yeah, it's always great to have high level people contribute to open source. I do have a question outside of the OER landscape and even outside of public, private universities or state governments. You mentioned Google. Have you ever had anybody from a corporation or business come to you? Like it could be Google, it could be NVIDIA or somebody else, and wanted to maybe not contribute a textbook, but wanted to contribute some resource to OpenStax?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's been really important for us. You mentioned the additive manufacturing textbook earlier. That's actually sponsored by HP. For example, we've had so much support from the Hewlett Foundation over the years, which is a big supporter
And
of all
HP
OER.
is it's a computer
Hewlett
manufacturer.
Packard. Yeah. So they make computers company. And they are very prominent in the additive manufacturing as well. So that was sponsored by them. So that type of, contribution, monetary contribution and support, they also provided tons of introductions into the field for us and so on. So they really helped across the board. And that's been the case with many others. I have to say, there aren't many, some people come to us and some people we come in contact with, but there's been so many folks that are from different organizations, very usually in the tech field that's prominent in terms of engaging in that way. But I think the number one thing is that these organizations, they see not only as part of their mission and their corporate social responsibility, but their own future, in terms of educated students and so on. And, the pipelines of workers, this workforce education is critically important. And everybody has to contribute to it, from, instructors in schools to some people like OpenStax to the corporations themselves. So, right. I mean, I'm almost reluctant to list because I don't want to leave anybody out. But
understandable.
But you mentioned Google. We work very closely with Google, Microsoft though as well. They have what they call the Learning Zone, which is built on OpenStax, in part on OpenStax textbooks. And that's, I should say that too. That little aside there. The other thing about working with OpenStax and OER in general is, it doesn't have to be exclusive. Like they can work with us, work with other people too. We're just looking to increase partnership, increase the overall education. And our mission, as I said, provide amazing education for all. Well, we can't do it alone. So these organizations are really, really important to us.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And it goes back to kind of the diversity of experiences. Somebody that's purely academic has been at university their whole career. They have something to contribute, but also from the private and business sector, they probably see problems that academics don't have to deal with. So that it goes back to having that diversity of experience and kind of having that all covered, which is great to hear.
Yeah. I mean, the layers of it, you mentioned, the nursing series before. The layers of the nursing experience are so, it's just amazing. Like, because, there's the teaching, we have instructors from all different types of institutions, as I mentioned, but even their experience in hospitals, which hospital they've worked at or they're affiliated with, whether it's public or private, whether it's in a rural area or an urban area, whether it's highly resourced or not, like, and that's not even their institution. That's the hospital they're associated with it. That adds different things. How if they're dealing with, retaining nurses in their hospital, like how are they dealing with that and how does that impact their teaching and so on? Like these layers and these experiences that you're talking about, they bring a lot of real world stories. And I think, are students going to remember everything in a textbook? No, we never expect them to, no matter how well we do reinforcement and concept checks and formative assessment, we do all those things. I don't mean to put them to the side, but stories are some of the things that stick. Right. So does that statistics problem that you wrote into is that meaningful for that student? Will they remember it? And likewise, in all the other textbooks, what are the experiences we're bringing forth so that the students can see themselves in that discipline?
Yeah, makes sense. Let's get into a critique of OER. So I had a chance to discuss some of the textbooks that are opened by OpenStax with college instructors. I heard some great feedback about the physics textbook offered by OpenStax. However, I did also hear a critique about some of the textbooks as well. So one of the critiques was that within a certain textbook, the subject matter covered within the chapter, in their view, did not align well with the questions that provided by the textbook. So when it comes to issues like these, how does your organization address issues like these?
No, thank you so much for asking that. It's really important. I mean, no matter how many reviews we have, until the book gets into use, that's when the feedback really comes in and you see what improvements you need to make. So what we try to do is we try to welcome that feedback, not only in what we say, but in how we make it available for people to give us that feedback. So we'll take any feedback we receive. And we have a very public facing, this used to be a thing that sort of, not to critique other publishers, but all publishers used to do is have a very public sort of, here's all of our errors and here's how we've corrected them. Not everybody does that anymore. We still believe in it. We think it's really important for everybody to see what's there, what's been commented on and what's been corrected. And if it hasn't been changed, if it's more of an opinion, why not? But so we take those in every time we get feedback like that, we or any other type of feedback, we take it in and we actually have the subject matter experts, the faculty who teach those courses, review that feedback. And they will say like, you know what, you're right. In the example you gave, we cover a whole portion of this section, these 2 pages. We don't have any questions represented in the end of chapter questions. And we want to assign some questions to check students' understanding of that. They don't align. Or, the other way, the questions at the end of the book are a little too hard for what's in the chapter. Those sort of misalignments can happen. So those faculty members will review that. They'll go ahead and recommend the changes, and then we'll get the changes into the book and then tell not only the person who mentioned the feedback, but also everybody else who's using the textbook that we've made this change, so they're aware. And sometimes it matters to them, and sometimes it's not something that's impacting them, depending on how they use it. And that goes for sort of those, what we would call errors or errata or misalignments. It also goes for thematic changes, something like, hey, we don't do this anyway in this way anymore in this discipline or this industry, or you're not representing this new group of people that are Your chapter on this doesn't have refugees represented. We have a whole group of refugees in my community. Can we represent them? That's something that, maybe when we wrote the book, it wasn't as much of an issue on that specific topic. And so we'll go ahead and make those changes too. So we really welcome that feedback. It's critically important. And in our case, since our materials are digital predominantly, we can make those changes very quickly. We don't have to necessarily wait. We don't just make them. It's not a wiki book. We let go through that process, but it can take, months instead of years to make that change and make sure it's represented.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I know I put a lot of customized material out for my class, and it's definitely an iterative process. And I'm apologizing a lot to my students because I may forget to. We work a lot with Excel just because statistics, it's especially in the 21st century, computationally heavy. Lots of working with computers, but yeah, every once in a while, a little bit more often than that, unfortunately, I'll have an incorrect calculation somewhere, or I miss putting in the corresponding data for a problem. So I could definitely relate when it comes to that, and there's a lot of fixing that goes on, a lot of iterative processes that go on to make sure that everything is up to snuff, but unfortunately, given how much material there is, there's always going to be something a little off. It's just minimizing those errors.
Yeah, it's exactly. And also, like I think you're really getting it right on the nose, because you recognize that you're willing to take that, and that's how we are as well. As I hope to make clear. And then sometimes it's just different opinions and approaches to teaching a course. I don't think I've ever heard an instructor say that any book that they're used is perfect, and so there's something in the book now. And then when they weigh that textbook for usage, whether it's OER or any other type, it's how well is it aligned to my course, and can I quote unquote teach around the things that are different. Where it gets difficult is where there's an actual error, and it's like, well, I didn't see that one coming. But but on that second piece about the maybe different approach, different opinion, different level of student, different purpose of course. That's where the OER, the open aspect, comes in, because it also could be modified. We will definitely own actual errors or things that need to be added, or gaps, and also currency issues and so on. Every year the Supreme Court makes a bunch of decisions that change a lot of things and a lot of courses. But for sort of difference of opinion or different audience, that's where the open license comes in, and people can go ahead and make those customizations.
Yeah, it goes back to the remixing. I think that's such a great feature of these textbooks. So I want to talk about open source versus proprietary. And just to give a high level overview, open source, you can think of it as something like a Creative Commons license for the textbooks that OpenStax provides versus a textbook that you would get from a publisher, such as the two well-known ones at university are Pearson and McGraw-Hill. So OER material has grown over time. I was looking at some stats. Research firm Bayview Analytics reported that in 2015 to 16, only 5% of higher educational faculty used OER material based on, I assume, their own surveys. And then from 2023 to 24, that proportion has grown to 26%. So 26% of faculty say that they use it, and then probably 74% may not, I assume, may use it slightly or maybe not at all. So do you think that proportion where it's going to go above 26 over time, and do you think that there's going to be a time when there's an ideal mix between open source and proprietary? Because as big of a fan as open source as I am, I do think there is some room for proprietary in some capacity, especially when it comes to some more obscure topics or some niche topics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the ideal mix, is probably defined best by the institution or the region, the system at hand, or maybe, even a group of faculty in a department. Because of the reasons you mentioned. Our material, as we've talked about, can mix into things really well, into programs, into curricula. But there are certain things that there are an OER for. There are types of courses or needs in a course. Is there ever going to be an OER version of Mathematica? That somebody can use? Like, no, I mean, that could be
Mathematica is a programming language used. I think I'm getting that right.
It's a like mathematical modeling software, and it has a language associated with it. Yeah, and it's produced by Wolfram Research, and those types of proprietary offerings, whether it's something like that or it's a homework system or a lab system, virtual lab or lab training. Those take extensive resources, and having those be all open source might be impossible. It just might be something that, unless massive funding comes down the pike from the government or from a corporation, they're going to have to be used. But where can OER play a role? So in some cases, we've seen that, right from our very beginning. I remember this from 2013, an instructor at a K-12 school saying, well, I'm using OER and I'm using the money saved instead of ordering that book to buy a bunch of microscopes. And you can take that all the way through to other types of academic technologies, really, interesting modeling software, high-end stuff, QuickBooks and accounting, or another types of software to give students experiential knowledge. And I think that's important because, where are we going with courses in general? I think that college courses are probably going to retain their structure and general approach for the next few years, but it's going to change. It's going to evolve. It's starting to, and it's going to at some point. So maybe the course content and a lot of those learning experiences that are based on, conceptual knowledge, basing the background skills, practice, and something like that, maybe those could be OER driven. But the higher end experiential software experience, or even not software, but just experience, maybe that's proprietary. And maybe that's the ideal mix that happens in the future. And that could have a great pathway, because that proprietary software or whatever tool they're using could be the thing they use when the students get into their job. Hey, do you have QuickBooks experience? Yes, I used it for 3 years. Already I'm ready to go. I used Quark. I Adobe platform, whatever it was. To get into that. And I'm sure this has many applications in the computing fields that I'm not that familiar with. But having that experience, maybe that's the ideal mix, that the savings and the remixability allows for more practical, workforce-oriented knowledge going forward. Or other things, other types of experiential learning too.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, since a lot of my students are going to the nursing field, a lot of the, ideally, if I were working with pure STEM people, I'd be using Python because in my main capacity in data science and machine learning, Python is, it's open source and everybody utilizes it. We use Excel. Excel's proprietary to Microsoft, but at least what I try to tell them is, when you're nursing a patient directly, Excel might not be the thing that is most important to know, but down the line, as a nursing administrator or some type of management position, it's going to be very valuable. So I do think that, freeing up those resources to spend more time on real world, it could be programs, it could be something else like microscopes, applications, is very, very valuable. And I just try to tie in my course to what can be done in the real world applications. Because I think at the end of the day, especially on the community college level, that's where the value is.
Absolutely. I think that those, if you think about the things that we learned in school, keep learning, those practical applications, again, you might not remember every definition or every example or every problem you did, but those real world things that relate to you. And then, we were just doing a program on sort of what makes a successful student. And we had hundreds of students actually give us their view, as well as the many professors and administrators and so on. One of the things that emerged was from the faculty and administrators was, it isn't about necessarily learning that one study skill or that one piece of knowledge. It's finding your purpose or finding the thing you want to study or finding what's right to you. And unless you have those real world experiences, it could be very abstract and obtuse. And I don't know if I even want to do this anymore. Right. But I mean, what's more, you're teaching a lot of nurses. What's more real world than that? Right. I mean, they're going to walk into clinicals and they're going to see people, actual patients and clients experiencing things and need to learn how to react. And need to have the background knowledge to know, okay, statistically, this is the outcome of this sort of usage, or why do we approach this way, and so on. Those are the decisions that nurses need to make every day. It's very, very critical thinking oriented, but it's also very data backed. So having that literacy and that ability to think that way and be familiar is so important for them. I just applaud what you're doing, and I think it's impactful.
Yeah, appreciate it. So when it comes to when you go to colleges and universities, I assume you're not just talking to administrators, you're probably talking to the faculty as well. When you have an instructor who is skeptical of OER for whatever reason, what hesitation do they give you, or what is something that they point to, and then what is your response to them when you hear that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the major things are. I have to say it's very similar to choosing any new textbook. I think if it's a textbook, so the instructors that use books are often not, ready to jump into a new book all the time. And if it's a department, they also have to consider, hey, it might not be me. It might be my 5 colleagues, my 30 colleagues, if there's adjuncts involved and so on. I mean, it could be really difficult. So I think that sort of inertia and the overall switching cost is actually the number one thing. So some of the objections we get kind of going to the actual OER side of it is, not understanding the quality, not understanding the source, and thinking about things like, will it still be there? Is it reliable? What is this site? I've never heard of it. And we see, that, like you mentioned, those adoption trends from Bayview, and our internal adoption trends, really show that, once any book gets to a sort of a certain threshold of a couple of hundred institutions using it, then it all of a sudden goes, like a skateboard ramp. It just takes right off, because colleagues talk to colleagues and they switch schools and they're at a conference and they're talking about this, and within the community it's happening. But when we get those objections, we really try to talk about our process, talk about the different types of access and the ways that the OpenStax resources can be used. And then we do the same thing, frankly, that if I were selling a commercial textbook, quote unquote, selling commercial textbook against another textbook, why don't you take a look at this chapter? What chapter are you teaching? What's your favorite chapter? How do we do it versus How does that do it? I mean, that's something that's important for faculty to see, because, in reality, faculty members that are choosing textbook, if a textbook is 600 pages, they can't read it all before they make the decision to use it. That, they just don't. It's their time is too valuable and too constrained. So they'll, look at it. They'll look at the table of contents. They'll look at a few chapters. They'll look at problematic areas. Hey, this is the area my students have the most trouble with. How does this textbook do it? And sometimes they'll see that we do it better, or, maybe, we have a more contemporary perspective on something because our book is actually newer. And sometimes they'll say, actually, I like the way my book does it my way too. And I have to say, for everything, we've been saying today about remixing and openness and so on, we're open to that too. That everybody should get to make their choice. We support incentive programs for OER. We work very closely with institutions on trying to drive OER usage. But if individual faculty member thinks that a commercial textbook is really the best thing for their students, we hope they're making that choice based on the content and the experience offered to those students. And they've made that choice. But if the awareness is there, maybe they'll choose OER.
Yeah. I will, I guess, speak to the inertia of using a textbook. One, this reminds me of a conversation I had when I was getting ready to teach. And this university instructor was saying that the first semester teaching is going to be the hardest. You have all your material put together, but then the next semester it gets easier. Then the next semester it gets even easier. So the marginal cost of teaching kind of goes down, meaning that you don't have to put together the material and review the material yourself. But it's also kind of a trade-off too. I frame a lot of things in terms of economics, and if you're kind of the professor there, and you're I've been teaching this textbook for 6 years, I know like the back of my hand. If I switch to a new one, that's going to raise the cost for myself personally. So that just reminded me of the conversation I had right when I was beginning to teach. And I can also sympathize too, because everybody's busy. You don't want to spend all your time remaking everything every semester. So it's just interesting to think about those trade-offs.
Exactly. I think thinking about it in terms of economics is right on. I mean, almost all the time when I don't have the data from other people, but when I say this on other sort of panels or, conference presentations and so on, it seems to come from all sorts of organizations and the schools themselves. One of the biggest issues in teaching is time, time constraints. And that goes, and it goes for adjuncts, it goes for, full-time, full professors. It goes for, of course, K-12 teachers too. There's so much non-academic activity going on, if I can use that term that way, that, that the limited time left for teaching, can be really hard to make a switch like that. Like I said, at some schools, there are programs to sort of assist with that. At some colleges, there are, hey, we'll give you a course release, meaning, maybe if you are teaching 4 courses, you can just teach 3. And in the other one, you can adapt the course to this OER resource. And you can see that being really impactful, especially at a let's say a community college system like Maricopa colleges or something. Like, think of how widespread. If 10 colleges, tens of thousands of students, if they go and revamp writing English composition course or a chemistry course or a business course, that could affect thousands of students a year. That takes time, and it's not a light investment at all. It's not, to switch the book. It's certainly not that. It's really more to it. And if it takes time to make that happen, we don't expect that everybody can just drop their current textbook or their current way of teaching at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, no, totally understandable. It's just everything's a trade-off.
Right.
So we've actually ended up talking a lot about future projects at OpenStax just throughout this conversation, but I'm kind of curious when it comes to the more specialized fields and the requests that you're getting from universities and colleges. We're in November of 2025. Buzzword for, I guess, the past 2-3 years has been AI, and it's actually kind of started to wear on me a little bit. I know a lot of other people are kind of worn down by it. But then you have other fields like quantum computing, where there's also excitement, a lot in the industry, but I know in academia as well. I'm kind of curious when it comes to these more niche fields that are in the popular zeitgeist, everybody's talking about them. Have people been approaching you about some of these fields?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we've been really thinking about ways to do them and do them well and efficiently. So yeah, I mean, the additive manufacturing that you mentioned, I mean, that could be the start of a whole, fourth industrial revolution, if you will, series with quantum computing and AI and other types of things. Or it could take the form of more something we hear a lot about are durable skills, those skills sometimes called soft skills that cross. Well, what about AI skills? But again, across disciplines. How does not just AI for AI's sake, writing a good question, but how does it actually apply in management? How does it apply in chemistry? How does it apply in statistics? And of course, in some courses, it's a shoe and it's right there for you, right? And in other cases, it might be more of a stretch. How does it apply in philosophy? And the ethics of everything. Where do you talk about it? Of course, the concepts are right there, but teaching them, as you said, takes time and, to your point, takes resources. So we would really like to dig into those. We've had some faculty come to us and say things like, hey, your existing book is there, but you need chapters on this or additional topics on this. Or, hey, I have maybe I've written half a textbook and this field is changing as rapidly as I can get. And that field ranges, like I said, from computing itself, but experimental psychology is changing. Like nursing is changing, right? So how did we do that? We've really been interested in doing that. OpenStax is, if it's not clear, very reliant on funding to make all that happen. And we work on that funding with the contributors, the authors, the contributors, the institutions we partner with. They can share in that funding. Of course, it's not all for OpenStax, but to make these resources, to put this time in, to maintain them, to do all the stuff we're talking about, takes a lot of funding. So sometimes that actually is the next step. Once we come up with a project and addressing a need, we apply for funding, whether it's government funding, private funding, philanthropic. We work with funding partners. We've seen such generous support, and that can help kickstart new activity in new course areas.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So as we get towards the end, I'm just curious about your background, Anthony. How did you end up at OpenStax? You mentioned that you worked at a proprietary publisher before. Is that where, just in general, your career started, and then you transitioned to OER? How did this all come about?
Yeah, I started a week out of college at Pearson Education. I was actually Prentice Hall then. And I stayed in publishing, in commercial publishing for several years at some different organizations, Pearson, Macmillan Publishing, and so on. And those are still around. They're still very active, and we partner with them, and so Macmillan specifically. But I really, when I was working especially at Macmillan, I was working on textbooks, but also on course technologies and improved ways to teach. And I was really working on some formative assessment type software involved with classroom response. And that's where the textbook was really important, but it wasn't the core importance. And we identified ways to make things really affordable for students. And that sort of just led me to this idea of, that affordability and access piece is really the important thing for me, bringing high quality, great learning experiences to students and doing it in a way that could be accessible for students, and every meaning of that word, accessible. And then OpenStax was right there, right? They were starting, they had the vision. OpenStax, the kernel of it started, not the kernel, the origins of it were at the turn of the century, frankly, at a platform called Connections, where our founder, Rich, created a place where people could post all different types of OER and edit and remix everything we're saying. That evolved into OpenStax, where we started making these textbooks. I just saw that as a great opportunity for myself. And it's been really rewarding. It's great to love what you do. It's very hard work that everybody here does. But the most rewarding thing, and the reason I really wanted to do it this way and go in this direction was, you can see those impacts every day. Like when you probably see it too. If that one experience that you can provide to a student, that one course, we get, I think in the past few years, 42,000 thank you notes from students using our materials, and we have 7 million students using it. And we love the 42,000 thank you notes. Just hearing from students how it impacted their lives, how they, it was between a textbook and food. It was baby clothes and food. This allowed me to buy, saving on the textbook allowed me to get a tutoring service, allowed me to fix my car that I needed to get to my job so that I could stay in school. Those sort of transformative things, it's so powerful. And I think the thing is that everybody in education shares that, so many, yourself, others, your colleagues. Why are we doing this? It's really to help those students, to help the current and next generation, be successful. That's how and why I kind of got to where I am.
That's great to hear. Yeah. And I definitely, over time, it's kind of similar, just teaching in general, going from YouTube and finally being able to teach. It's been an amazing experience so far. And having resources like yours just helps make me more efficient. Hopefully that helps out my students as well. So thank you for me as well.
Of course.
So the last question I want to ask, if there is an academic instructor that's heard of OpenStax or is maybe listening to this and wants to get involved with your organization, whether it's developing a textbook or some other resource, what do they have to do to get involved?
Honestly, they can just reach out. And in many cases, fortunately or unfortunately for them, if they have a book idea or something like that, it'll probably come to me. But they can reach out at info@openstax.org, or get to us through our website, openstax.org. There's various forums and places. Probably the help on the top right is probably the best way to go. And I'm glad to share my information. And then again, like we have K-12 assets as well. So we have a team working on that. And I would just say that, any faculty member who wants to contribute, contribution could be in many ways. It could be authoring, it could be reviewing, providing feedback. I haven't mentioned, I probably should have, we have a platform that's called Assignable that's meant to build on all of these things that we're talking about, basically bring that access and ease of use into the learning management system where instructors are teaching. But that platform, it's based on a lot of OpenStax materials, but it also brings in outside materials. So if an instructor has, hey, I've developed this great set of course resources. It's not a textbook. It's a bunch of study guides, or it's a set of videos, or it's a bunch of activities. And I just want to share them. How can I get them out there? There are, as we said, many other repositories, but we can help with that too. Redistributing them, promoting them. Our organization is OpenStax. What we produce is OER. So we want to make sure that everybody else, has an opportunity to use it and see it and capitalize on all the great work that's happening. So I just invite everybody to submit, ask, inquire, suggest, provide feedback, and we'll take it from there wherever it can go.
Great, thank you. I'll link all of the contact information within all the different platforms. Anthony, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
I so appreciate it. Great speaking to you. Have a great day.
All right, thanks everybody.